In this video, I'm testing a 1949 Rover 75. This is the P3. So most classic car fans know about the Rover P4, but this is the interim model that came just before it. Like many manufacturers, Rover was struggling a bit after the Second World War and initially just started making its pre-war cars again. But in 1948 they launched the P3. It contained some modern improvements, independent front suspension being a key example, and new engines, which we'll get to in a moment. And this was kind of the interim model because they had the P4 in development, but that wasn't going to be ready until 1949. So in 1948 they revealed the P3. The styling is very traditional 1930s, but I believe it's an all steel body. Times were starting to move on a bit. We're in the shade just because it's so blooming hot today, so I apologise if this is a little gloomy. And you've got the boot here with the Rover 75 badge. And interestingly, if we head into the boot, which has two catches because of its great weight, it looks like there's a spare wheel in there, and there actually is. Very heavy boot lid, and under this panel, which is screwed in and not all that easily accessible, is the spare wheel, which means the boot is accessible. It's typical of these sort of 1930s designs. The boot is not all that massive. The thinking was if you had larger loads, you'd just leave the boot lid down and you'd strap them in on top of everything. That is just how it worked in those days. So back up with that, and we'll latch. Oh, well, maybe we'll latch the other side first. There's a screw head sticking out there. There we go. Right, now we got the boot latched in properly. Old cars, they're certainly different. So Rover was a company very much with engineering at the heart of it. So these were very robust cars, which made them, popular in the Commonwealth countries. But of course there aren't very many concessions to the harsher conditions here. I mean, you have got useful things like these fresh air vents to scoop some fresh air in. You have got winding windows all round with these little deflector bars, so you can have the window open a bit and not get wet. But I don't think it rains quite so much here, so that's perhaps not quite so much of an issue. But there were a lot of manufacturers built these interim cars. Jaguar built the Mark V, which was a Mark IV, but with independent front suspension again. They would kind of ease in these extra components, and in some ways it's still quite elderly. It's got hydro-mechanical brakes, in which I believe the front wheels are hydraulically operated and the rears mechanically, so rods that you have to keep adjusted. We should probably head aboard. We've got suicide doors, which means they open this way. The thinking being that if you are a lady, it is easier to make a more demure entrance and keep one's knees together when you swing them into the motor vehicle. Although they probably didn't expect a lady to be this side, that just wasn't proper. But here we are inside, and I'll just close that. Sadly the window winder is broken on this side, but you can adjust the window by just pushing it down, and that seems to allow a certain amount of ventilation. Thankfully we have a manual here. This one's for a 1948 and this is a 1949, but nonetheless it's quite useful. So books to help us work our way around the dashboard, because of course nothing is labelled at all. So we'll start on the steering column, where we have a horn switch, which presumably only works when you... It doesn't work at all. There is no horn. Yeah, nice steering wheel, fixed central hub. You see, these things are nothing new. They existed a long time ago, and often you'd have an indicator switch on this center hub. But no, on this one the indicator is on a stalk, which must be one of the earliest instances of that happening. And incidentally, if I do turn that on, we'll go out and have a look at the indicators. I'd usually save it for the end, but I'm just too excited, I can't wait, because we have indicator lights fitted, which don't seem to flash. It's obviously not a requirement. but we've also got the original trafficators. So people don't know to look for these, which is why having some extra lighting is a good idea. But yeah, turn the trafficator off and it goes away, and that's how it operates. The current owner of the car has no idea why they didn't paint these panels when they painted the rest of the car, and it's a fair observation. Let's just see it again. Oh, wrong side. There we go. Beautiful. So that's how the indicator system works. Jumping back in, we should turn the ignition off because we don't want to melt the coil. Headlamp switch this side, 3 points, and that's our main beam switch on there. There is no foot mounted dip switch, so that's a bit of a pain because you're going to have to take your hand off the wheel every time you wish to adjust that. So while that's good, not quite so convinced about that, but they were still learning about ergonomics in these days. On the dashboard here we have no switches, but sorry, no labelling. So this is the petrol and oil gauge, and the theory is you turn the ignition on and get your petrol, and then you should be able to press that and get an oil reading. So maybe we've got plenty of oil. The owner says do not trust it under any circumstances. There is a Jaeger clock, which I'm sure doesn't work, and oh, now I'm struggling. I think this one's a petrol reserve switch, so that's what that one does, but I'm going to have to consult the manual. This marvellous manual. Look at this, and here we go. What is G? G is the, oh yes, the interior roof light switch, and this is just what it was like in these days. They just didn't label anything. So if I do that, our interior light comes on. Now, it looks like we've got a sliding roof as well, but the fact it's held closed with cable ties suggests that probably isn't working. Turn the interior light off again before we get too far away. We've got key ignition, and that'll be the starter. We'll get to that. A little ammeter, speedometer here in miles an hour, despite the fact it's a kilometre an hour country. And over here, water temperature and oil pressure, which are of course non-existent at the moment. That's the front fog light switch, which is a single lamp in the middle, which maybe we'll have a look at in a bit, but I'd probably should get the engine running before running too many lights. And oh, I've forgotten what this one down here is. I know what the big knob is. The big knob is a freewheel, and that was something Rovers had. You know, a lot of two-stroke cars have a freewheel, and basically the transmission goes into a neutral phase as you're driving along. N is the windscreen wiper control. That's an important one. We definitely need to know all about that one. Q is a cold start, so that's our choke. That's our wiper control. This one is consulting my little book. Oh, that's panel light rear stat, so you can adjust the illumination of your panel lights. But yeah, very little of this will light up, only the dials when you're driving along. So at night you've got a bit of a battle to work out what's going on, and that continued even to the P6. The heater controls don't illuminate on a Rover P6, and they're quite complicated, so you need to know your way around them. It's rather distressing. Down here we have the gear shift, and I'll just push the clutch in and put the handbrake on maybe. Very mechanical. Listen to that. That is proper engineering right there, with a separate button that you must press to enable you to get into the gate for reverse. So that's quite smart. Got Rover badges on the pedals as well, quite tight in the footwell, because on these pre-war designs the body very much curves inwards. But you know, nice bit of wood about the place. Some very old bits of wood down here, down the side. So maybe, yeah, it is still an ash frame by the look of it, so not all steel. So proper old coach building style, and a mixture of, you know, original old leather, and I suspect it's had some retrimming at some point, possibly even in vinyl. These feel a bit vinyl-y to me. Maybe they thought leather wouldn't be able to hack the temperatures. I don't know, I could be wrong. It's just my gut feeling. But yeah, the freewheel control, so that's fixed, so when you ease off the throttle it will stay in gear. In the freewheel it will effectively coast, so it's like putting the clutch in, which should save you a little petrol. Oh, and that one's the heater control, which incidentally seems to be the same switch you'd find in a Morris Minor over a decade later. and I quite like this fake little shelf. But plenty of cubby holes so you can carry spares, points condenser and a dizzy cap, for instance. But otherwise, quite a nice pleasant place to sit. Someone has fitted seat belts, which I concede is a very, very sensible idea. And similarly, the sun visors, I can't believe those are the original fittings. They seem a bit plasticky, but a sensible modification. Well, we simply must see the windscreen wipers in action, so I'll just pop the ignition on and apply the screen wash. It's a bit dusty on the old windscreen anyway, and oh, there we go, look at that. I wouldn't call that comprehensive wipering, to be honest, but nonetheless, they're quite sweet. Here in the rear, there is enough room for my knees alert. It's quite a comfortable seat. It feels quite softly sprung. There's what looks like a centre armrest, but it doesn't seem to be a centre armrest, but that's okay. We've got winding windows, suicide doors in the rear also, and that was carried over to the P4. The P4 also had suicide rear doors, and this window winds in an entirely sufficient manner. This is a normal saloon, so it's got the 6 light, 1, 2, 3 each side. The sports saloon didn't have this window because sports, yeah, they used different terminology back in the old days. But here in the rear, I also find a parts list and workshop manual for said cars. So I'm going to place those on the floor so they don't slide about during the drive. But yeah, note how the roof just cants up a little here, so I've got a little extra headroom, but you know, I could wear a hat here quite comfortably. Right, with all the pretty bird song going on here in Australia, we shall take in the engine. Moving that panel lever rather allows us to lift just the top. A lot of cars of this era would have that attached to that, and it makes them really fiddly to get in, but that works really well. There's a separate thumb screw down here which releases this entire side panel, which I'm not going to try and demonstrate one-handed, but that will give you much better access. Here is the engine. It's a 2103cc straight 6 engine, inlet over exhaust, which is why the cam cover seems a bit unusual, because the inlet valves are operated on the top of the head in the traditional manner to which we have become accustomed. I suppose that's the modern manner. The exhaust valves are at the side of the head, and it's an inlet over exhaust design, also used by Rolls-Royce on their big 6-cylinder engines before they went all crazy V8 powered. So it should be a very smooth engine with good torque characteristics. It's called the Rover 75. It's the first use of that tag on these, because it's 75 brake horsepower, but I think that was an SAE figure, so in reality probably more like 68, 70. There was a smaller 4-cylinder version, 1.6 litre. They didn't sell so many of those because I imagine they were quite gutless, but that 1.6 litre inlet over exhaust engine was used in the first Land Rovers, and yeah, they weren't great for performance either. But we shall see about starting this magnificent engine. Oh, incidentally, that moves the seat back and down, so the further back you go, the lower the seat goes, which is quite a good idea, because shorter drivers tend to need a little more height. You do have to negotiate your way around this huge steering wheel. So here we go. We shall make sure that's in neutral. I believe it is. Ignition on, start. There's our oil pressure coming up. This is a cold engine, so we've got no water. So it takes a while for that oil pressure to come up, but we're showing a good 30 psi now. There we go, and now we can turn some lights on. So side lights, headlights, and let's see if that central fog light works. No lights to tell you what's on, you just have to kind of guess. Close the door. Oh yes, we've got full illumination going on. So we have our side lights, which are on the side. We have our headlamps, and we've got the fog lamp. I'm not sure how much help that's going to be, to be honest, but nonetheless it does function. And we'll see what illumination we've got going on at the rear. Yeah, there's some, but you have to say that car illumination has come a long way. I'm guessing the top is a brake, perhaps, but yeah, modern LED edition of the indicators. We've got number plate lights as well. I would normally save all this to the end, but so you're getting all this nice and early. But let's actually lift the lid and listen to this engine. And mostly what you can hear is the belt. You'll notice this is an export model. It's got a shroud on the radiator. There's kind of early use of such shrouds. They didn't bother on the UK ones. But yeah, this sounds absolutely lovely. Although, actually I think that one's the throttle, I think that was the choke. Beautiful, all this mechanical gubbins going on. Just delightful. Just have to close everything gently. You don't want to slam anything on this car. So we shall turn off the fog light initially. This is our dip switch, and yeah, I can see the headlamps changing their position. But yeah, there we go. That is the Rover P4. We'll note that there is some Triangle of Doom going on. I kind of let the pre-war designs off a bit, and this very much is one. These were early days, they were learning, and you'll note the wiper parks here because they thought that cleared more of where the driver needed to see. Enormous corners of disappointment over on the passenger side. It's just how they were. Right, here we go then. We go ignition on, and we are starting from Pie in the Sky here north of Sydney, which was recommended by at least 2 people, I think. So she's a bit warm already. We're not going to linger. Beautiful first gear whine. Put my left trafficator out, and away we go. No synchro mesh on second. Self-cancelling indicators. So it's the same gearbox used in Land Rovers, effectively. So Series 1 and Series 2 with the synchro only on 3rd and 4th. But it's such a grunty, long stroke engine, which was very much the way of things at the time. Very nice. Because there was an RAC horsepower measurement based on bore, which affected your road tax. So engines tended to be narrow bore but long in stroke to get the capacity up, and that's why this engine is such a torquey devil, because a long stroke tends to have or tends to generate more torque than outright power. But it's not an engine that likes revving because the piston has to move so far. That's why modern engines tend to be over square, end of that lane, and make them much more revvy. Oh, here you go, old girl, you can cool down now. It's amazing to think this car is 71 years old. She's happy around 40-45. We'll allegedly do 70 miles an hour, but we're certainly not going to attempt that in the heat of Sydney. That would be most unfair. The seats are vinyl, but they have been retrimmed. They would originally have been a rich burgundy leather, and the owner does hope to replicate that. This is how he bought the car. The steering is very heavy and a bit prone to vagueness in places, so it doesn't automatically inspire confidence. It's get around these cyclists. Sure they will forgive me, I can't lose my momentum. It is too valuable. And you don't want to go too quick anyway, because the brakes do not really inspire confidence. It doesn't help, I think this car has had a bit of a brake overhaul recently, so things are probably still bedding in, but regardless of that, the brakes need a very good shove, and will probably slow you down once. There we go. Yeah, I mean, the road holding is okay, it's just the steering does not, it's not inspiring too much confidence in me at the moment. This is quite a sharp bend, so I might downshift to third. Not as sharp as I remember. There goes a Ford Falcon XR6 or 8. So yeah, you don't rev the engine, you just change and the torque is there. But it's surprisingly jolly, and you don't really mind the fact you're having to just sit back and take it easy. She seems more than happy to potter along. She does get quite warm. I'm having to keep a bit of an eye on the old temperature gauge. So now as I come off the throttle, oh no, that's not disengaging at all. Maybe the freewheel doesn't work. The owner didn't seem entirely sure, he's never used it. Thought I'd just give you a bit of a driver's view. Select third just to stop the gearbox, and into gear, and away we go. I love the Viking at the end of the bonnet there. He's having a good look at the road ahead. I can use that as a target. I can line cyclists up in it. Only joking. We're all here to share the same roads. But yeah, it's a very classic driving position and a very classic driving experience as well. Oh, we can go to 80 kilometers an hour now. Got a bit of downhill so I can get a bit of cooling into the engine before we start climbing our way back up to pie in the sky. So yeah, these old cars, you just can't thrash them about. I know I have a reputation for thrashing cars. Some people not happy the way I treated the Yugo. Sorry folks, but I just can't help myself. You give me a small car that hasn't got much power, I will generally drive it quite hard. And that's exactly how I treat my own cars, by the way. Not just other people's. Oh yeah, I'm starting to get a feel for this steering now, I think. Just be measured with your approach. Don't try anything too ambitious. Well, that's been a lovely, if rather pedestrian and sedate drive. A Rover P4 from 1949. Not the usual fare of Hubnut, but I just love driving different things, and it's a different driving style for me entirely. I'm not used to driving cars where you have to be a bit gentle and sort of, you know, restrained with them, but nonetheless it's good to try different things, and I've enjoyed that very much. So thanks very much to the owner for letting me have a go. I shall say thank you very much for watching this video from here in Australia, and I look forward to seeing you in a future video. Farewell. I've already done the lights, so what am I going to do with my bonus footage? I know. How about the wonderful little tray of tools, all of which, well, almost all of which seem to still be there. That's just lovely. Even the little pressure gauge there. Marvellous.